My name is Nadine Voss. I'm 36 years old and I just returned to the Pacific Northwest after 6 long years away. The last time I was here, I was leaving everything behind my family, my father, the timber empire. But today, I was back. Not by choice, though. I was here for the reading of my grandfather's will. The law office had that sterile, polished smell fresh paper, leather, and power. The kind of place where things were decided without warmth or love. Just cold, hard facts. The room was small but grand, with oak bookshelves that lined the walls and a heavy wooden desk at the center. Across from me, my father, Dominic Voss, sat in a chair, silent and cold. His gaze never once flickered toward me, not even when I walked in. Dominic had always been a man of few words, the kind who thought a look could speak volumes, and right now that look told me everything I needed to know. He didn't care. Then there was Mallory, my half-sister. Dressed in a sharp suit, her blonde hair pulled back tightly, she looked exactly like the type of woman who would rise to the top of Voss Timber, a legacy I had no part in. Her smile, one that was equal parts smug and expectant, said everything. She knew what was coming. She was ready for it. The lawyer, a man I'd never met before, cleared his throat and opened the envelope in front of him. The silence was thick, suffocating even. He started reading. Nadine Voss is hereby granted controlling interest in Voss Timber, several of the family properties, and a cash transfer of $63 million, he said, his voice flat, as if he were reading from a grocery list. My hands gripped the arms of the chair, my knuckles going white. The words felt heavy, like they were meant to suffocate me with their finality. I stared at my father. I expected something, a flicker of recognition maybe, a reaction, but there was nothing. He didn't even flinch. Then, without saying a word, Dominic stood up slowly. Mallory watched him with that same smug expression as he walked over to the fireplace. The lawyer paused, confused, glancing between the two of us. In one smooth motion, Dominic pulled out a match, struck it against the side of the box, and lit the check on fire. The paper curled and blackened, the flames dancing briefly before they consumed it entirely. It was as if he was erasing me from the family right in front of my eyes. "This isn't your legacy, Nadine," Dominic said quietly, his voice devoid of any emotion. He didn't even look at me when he spoke. His words felt more like a dismissal than anything. "This is a symbol of what you never were." I could feel the heat of the fire in my chest, but my face remained cold, expressionless. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something, anything at him. But instead, I sat there, gripping the armrest harder, forcing my hands to stop shaking. That was the moment I knew for sure. Dominic wasn't just cutting me out of the family, he was trying to erase me. I had no part in this world anymore. Not with him, not with Mallory, not with anyone in that room. The will had been read, the money was gone, and my father's attempt to snuff me out had been complete. "Is that all?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper but loud enough for everyone to hear. The lawyer glanced nervously at Dominic before clearing his throat. He nodded, closing the folder in front of him. "Yeah, Nadine, that's all." I stood up, my legs feeling as if they might collapse under me. Without looking back at them, at the family I no longer recognized, I turned and walked out of the room. There was no point in staying. I left that law office, but I didn't go far. The drive home felt like an eternity, like I was trapped in a bubble, hovering between a past I couldn't escape and a future that felt more like an empty promise than anything real. When I pulled up to the house, I almost didn't recognize it. My childhood home, once full of life and laughter, stood silent and imposing. The lawn was neat, too neat, everything trimmed just so, like it had been waiting for the next chapter of its life, but there was no one left to turn the page. No one left who cared. I grabbed my bag and walked up the front steps, pausing at the door for a moment. It hadn't changed. The door knocker was still the same brass one that my mother had insisted was classy, and the paint on the front door was the same shade of deep red that my father had picked out when I was a teenager. It was all so familiar, and yet, it was as if it belonged to someone else. Inside, everything was pristine. Not a thing was out of place. It didn't look like a home, it looked like a showroom. My old bedroom, the one I'd spent years running away from, had been converted into a meditation space complete with a soft beige rug and candles that smelled like the kind of things you'd find in a spa. I stood in the doorway, my heart sinking as I looked around. There were no medals on the walls, no photographs of me at my graduation or at the firehouse, no souvenirs from my years of flying helicopters, battling wildfires. It was all gone, packed away, forgotten, every trace of me erased. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps feeling foreign against the polished wood floors. I reached my old room and stood in the doorway, staring at the empty space. The bed was gone, replaced with a minimalist white futon. The shelves where I used to keep my gear, my photos, my life, were bare. I could see a few things had been shoved in the corner, old boxes filled with the remnants of my life, the parts they didn't bother to throw away. The silence of the house was suffocating. No one was here. No one had been for a while. It was just me, alone in a place I no longer recognized. The emptiness of it all gnawed at me. This house, once filled with noise and chaos, had turned into nothing more than an empty shell. A few months earlier, I had returned from my final fire season, exhausted, hoping to find some comfort in the familiar. But when I'd walked through the front door, I'd been met with nothing but indifference. I had expected to be welcomed home, to have someone acknowledge the sacrifices I'd made, the risks I'd taken. I expected to find a trace of the family I'd left behind, the ones who used to be my whole world. But when I walked in, it was as if I didn't exist. My old room had been converted before I even had a chance to unpack. There was no warmth here, no homecoming. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. The next morning, I packed my things and left. I moved into a tiny studio in a part of town that barely felt like the same city. It was cramped, barely big enough to fit a bed, a small desk, and a few scattered belongings. But it was mine, and that made all the difference. From that moment on, I stopped existing in their world. They had erased me, but I had learned to disappear before they even had the chance. Months before all of this, before the cold dismissal at the law office, before my father burned the check, I met my grandfather. It wasn't planned. He'd called out of the blue one day after years of silence and asked if I wanted to meet him for lunch at a little seaside diner he liked. I wasn't sure what to expect. Grandfather had been distant my whole life, more a figurehead than a person I could really connect with. But something about his voice that day had sounded different, almost urgent. I'd agreed, half out of curiosity, half because I figured I had nothing better to do than let him run his mouth for an hour. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when I showed up. The diner was a small, weathered place overlooking the harbor. Salt air mixed with the scent of fresh seafood and the low murmur of the waves crashing against the shore gave the place an oddly comforting, nostalgic feel. I found him sitting in a booth near the back, stirring his coffee with slow, deliberate movements. He didn't look old enough to be my grandfather. Sure, his hair was thin and silver, but he still had a sharpness in his eyes that made him seem like the same man I remembered from childhood, a man who used to tower over me, who spoke with the weight of someone who had always been in control. He didn't greet me with a hug or a smile, just a simple nod as if it was business, and we were both here to get something done. "I've been thinking a lot about you, Nadine," he said, his voice rough but not unkind. "You've been gone a long time." I sat down across from him, unsure what to say. I hadn't been prepared for this. I didn't know what kind of conversation this would be. "I've been thinking about a lot of things," he continued, "and I don't think you realize just how deep the game runs in this family. You're too focused on the surface, the money, the business. But there's more to it than that. More than you think." He paused for a moment, eyes narrowing as if he was weighing something heavy. "I need you to take something," he said, suddenly standing and pulling an envelope from the inside of his jacket. The wax seal was red, a bold V embossed into it. It looked old, but important. He slid it across the table to me. "Open this if they try to erase you, because they will," he added quietly, his eyes darkening. I was confused. What was he talking about? "What do you mean, Grandpa?" He leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving mine. "Your father, your half-sister, they've got plans, Nadine. They're good at rewriting the past, bending things to their will. They'll try to make you disappear because you don't fit. You'll be cast out no matter how much you've given to them. It's not just the money. It's the power they want." My mind raced. Why would you think that? Why would they? Because it's how they operate. Look at what they've already done. Look at how they've treated you. And if you don't do something about it, they'll erase you. Make sure you're gone. Just like that. He snapped his fingers for emphasis. I felt a tightness in my chest. This wasn't just family drama. This was something deeper, something bigger. Grandfather's gaze softened a little as he reached for his cup of coffee. "I'm sorry I couldn't give you more, Nadine, but I can't protect you anymore." "But that," he pointed at the envelope, "can." I stared at the envelope in front of me. I didn't understand. How could a piece of paper change anything? But I didn't argue. I slipped it into my jacket pocket and left the diner that day with more questions than answers. And when my father burned the check, when Mallory's smug smile flashed in the law office, I understood. I opened the envelope that night and everything grandfather had warned me about was there. Pages of carefully typed words, a map of financial transfers, notes on family history, and at the very end, a final message. They can erase your place in this world, Nadine, but they can never erase the truth. That was all I needed. I knew what I had to do. I never expected to find myself standing in a crowded DMV lobby, my mind reeling from the events of the past few days. The lawyer's office, the burning of the check, my father's cold dismissal. It was all happening so fast, and I was still trying to make sense of it. The letter from my grandfather hadn't helped to soothe the chaos inside me. If anything, it only solidified the gnawing suspicion that something far worse was at play. The line at the counter was moving slowly, as it always does in places like this. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly glow over the rows of plastic chairs. People sat with their eyes glazed over, staring at nothing, some of them flipping through their phones, others glancing nervously at the clock, wondering how long they'd be stuck here. I took a deep breath and walked up to the clerk when my number was called. She was young, maybe in her early 20s, with a bored expression on her face. I handed her my driver's license and the necessary paperwork, asking to renew it. "Your name and date of birth, please?" she asked mechanically. "Sure," I said, giving her the information. She typed away at her keyboard, eyes flicking between the screen and the papers I handed her. She didn't look up again, her fingers moving like clockwork, pushing buttons with an efficiency that felt almost robotic. A minute passed, two, and then she paused. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a second, then quickly clicked again. I felt the weight of her silence grow as I stood there, waiting. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Miss Voss, can I see some other identification?" she asked, looking at me with mild confusion. I frowned. "Why? Is there a problem with my license?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she clicked through several more screens, glancing back at me with a strange look in her eyes. "Can you step over here for a moment?" My stomach twisted. I followed her over to a small desk where she motioned for me to sit. "Just a moment, okay?" she said, walking away briskly, leaving me with my thoughts. I stared at the counter, my mind racing. What was going on? Was this a mistake? I was already frustrated by the day's events, but this felt different. This felt wrong. A few minutes later, she returned with a slightly older man in a blue suit, a supervisor, I assumed. He was scanning through my files on his computer, his face tense. "Miss Voss, I need to speak with you about an issue with your records," he said, his voice clipped. "It's unusual." "What do you mean, unusual?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is something wrong with my license?" "Well, it seems your license was flagged for an issue regarding your status. Your records show that you were declared deceased 2 years ago." I blinked. "What?" He nodded solemnly. "That's right. According to our system, you were reported as dead, officially 2 years ago. The paperwork was filed by someone else." My chest constricted, and for a moment, I felt like the world tilted beneath me. "What do you mean someone else filed it?" My mind raced. Who would do something like that? Who would erase me so completely? "I can't speak to the specifics of how this happened," the man said, his tone professional but distant. "But according to our records, you've been legally dead for 2 years. There was a formal filing of your death." I stared at him, the words barely making sense. I felt like I was drowning, unable to catch my breath. My thoughts scattered, and a sharp, cold panic began to creep into my chest. I shook my head. "This isn't possible. This is a mistake." "We'll have to look into it further, of course," he said, already typing something into the system. "We'll need to verify your identity. It's going to take a few days, but you may not be able to get a new license until this is sorted out." I nodded numbly, my heart pounding. I tried to take it all in, but the world felt distant, like I was outside of it, looking in. "I'll take care of this," I said, my voice tight. "But how do you fix something like this? How do I prove I'm alive?" "You'll need to contact the authorities, your lawyer, someone who can help with this kind of thing," he said. "But for now, I'll mark your record for further investigation. We'll do our best to expedite the process." I left the DMV in a daze, my mind in freefall. Someone had declared me dead. Someone had erased my very existence, not just from my family's records, but from the system itself. It was more than just a legal issue. This was intentional. Someone, likely someone close to me, had made sure I didn't exist on paper anymore. They had wiped me out, and now I was a ghost, wandering through a world that refused to acknowledge my existence. The letter from my grandfather weighed heavily in my pocket, its contents now haunting me in a way I hadn't fully understood before. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't just a bad joke. This was part of something bigger, something planned. And I was beginning to realize that I wasn't just battling my father and Mallory. I was fighting for my own right to be. I had to find out who had done this. Because whoever it was, they were trying to bury me, physically and legally. And they weren't going to get away with it. The weight of the DMV encounter hadn't lifted by the time I found myself sitting across from Harlow Dean, an independent auditor who specialized in fraud and financial forensics. I had known Harlow from years ago, back when I was involved in investigating some financial irregularities in a firefighting contract out of Nevada. At the time, Harlow had been invaluable, quiet, meticulous, and brilliant. He had saved my ass back then. When I called him about what had happened, he didn't ask questions. He just agreed to meet. No hesitation, no judgment. I hadn't told him much about what had been going on, only that something strange had happened with my identity and that I needed someone who could look deeper, someone who could find out who had decided I didn't exist. Harlow's office was tucked above a dusty print shop downtown. It was a far cry from the sleek, high-tech offices I was used to, but that was part of his charm. He didn't need the shiny buildings or glass walls to make a name for himself. His work spoke louder than anything else. The room smelled like paper and old coffee. Every inch was cluttered with stacks of files, printers whirring softly in the corner. A few yellowed documents were tacked to the wall, but everything about Harlow's space was organized chaos. It was comfortable in a way that felt like it belonged to him, like he was completely at home in his own world of numbers and details. He looked up from his computer as I walked in, his sharp, calculating eyes briefly assessing me before he waved me in. "Have a seat. Let's figure out what the hell is going on," Harlow said, his voice low but calm. I sat down, a knot in my stomach. He gestured to a stack of papers, a few digital files flashing across his multiple screens. The man was always prepared. He knew how to get to the heart of things quickly, and he wasn't wasting any time. "I've got the basics on your family situation," Harlow began, typing a few things into his computer as he spoke. "It's messy, to say the least. And you mentioned your grandfather left something for you?" I nodded and pulled the envelope from my bag, placing it gently on the desk between us. Harlow's fingers stilled for just a second as he looked at the wax seal. This is what I think it is?" he asked, his voice suddenly more serious. "It's the letter," I said, the words still sounding strange. "My grandfather warned me that they'd try to erase me. I thought he was being paranoid, but now I'm not so sure." Harlow didn't respond right away. He took the letter, carefully breaking the wax seal. Then he read it. The silence stretched on as he absorbed the contents of my grandfather's last message. "This is," he began, leaning back in his chair. "This is a map of their manipulation, Nadine. Your grandfather wasn't just worried about the money, they were erasing your identity." I leaned forward, urgency rising in my chest. "What do you mean? How?" Harlow tapped a few keys on his computer, pulling up several scanned pages. He turned the screen toward me. "Look at these," he said. "Your name's been removed from all major assets, everything from bank accounts to property records. No traces of your existence anywhere, except for a few things that seem staged." I frowned, scanning the documents. There were scans of contracts, legal documents, and corporate agreements. Everything seemed in order at first glance. But then something caught my eye. My signature. It was there, but something about it was off. The slant of the letters, the pressure of the ink. "This isn't my signature," I whispered, my heart sinking. "No," Harlow confirmed, his voice tight. "Someone forged it. Someone who had access to your private records. And not just your financial records. They've been slowly erasing you, Nadine, using your identity to funnel money, sign documents, manipulate the system." My head spun. "They've been using me," I murmured, barely able to process the weight of his words. "For years, they've been using my name for whatever they needed, and now they're erasing me like I never existed." "Exactly," Harlow said. "It's more than just financial. This is identity theft on a scale I've never seen. And it's deeply connected to your family, Whoever's behind it has been controlling your legacy, and they've been doing it for a long time. I swallowed, a sick feeling rising in my throat. Who could be behind this? It has to be my father, right? Harlow's fingers were already typing again, pulling up more documents on his screen. I'm not sure yet, he said, scanning a few more records. But these signatures? He tapped the screen, highlighting several documents. They were signed by someone using your name, but it's not just any forger. This was calculated. This was done with intent, with precision. I stared at the names. They weren't my own. Whoever did this wanted to make sure you couldn't fight back. They didn't just want your money, they wanted your place in the world, your position, your family's legacy. The words hit me hard, each one digging deeper than the last. But why? I asked, more to myself than anyone else. Why would they do this? Harlow looked me in the eye, his expression cold but not unkind. Because you're a threat, Nadine. You always have been. You're the one who could change things, and they couldn't let that happen. Not when you've got a claim to the throne, to everything. I blinked, the realization slowly dawning. They want control, and they knew if I had that money, that position, you'd be the one running Voss Timber, Harlow finished for me. And that's the last thing your father and half-sister want. They've worked too hard to keep you out of the picture, and now they're covering their tracks, but it's not too late. We can expose this. I took a deep breath. The fight was just beginning. And I'm not stopping until I get it all back, I said, my voice low but firm. Harlow gave me a small nod, his eyes flicking over the documents. We'll need proof, Nadine. Proof that they've been forging your name and manipulating these contracts. We'll go after everything. Money, power, signatures. We'll tear them down one piece at a time. I looked at the documents in front of me. This wasn't just about reclaiming my family's empire anymore. It was about making sure the truth lived on, no matter how much they tried to bury me. I'll need your help, I said, and I'll need to take them down for good. Harlow's lips curled into a small smile. You've got it. Let's get to work. The following week, Harlow and I had gathered all the proof we could find. Document forgeries, fake signatures, tampered property deeds, everything we needed to expose the lengths my father and Mallory had gone to in order to erase me. But there was one thing left. The most important piece. It was time to go public. I couldn't do this alone anymore. It wasn't just about my inheritance or reclaiming what was rightfully mine. This was about exposing the darkness of my family's secrets to the world. I needed someone who could carry this story, someone who could make the truth impossible to ignore. That's when I contacted Elian Marquez. I'd heard about him through a few underground channels. Elian was known for taking down corruption, small-town scandals, corporate betrayal, things most reporters would shy away from. But he didn't shy away from the ugly truth. He exposed it. I found him at a quiet coffee shop downtown, the kind of place where writers and journalists gathered to gossip and exchange tips. Elian was sitting in the corner, hunched over a notebook, scribbling furiously with a half-empty cup of coffee sitting untouched beside him. I walked over to the table, and he looked up with a slow, measured gaze. His dark eyes studied me for a moment before he offered a quiet smile. He knew why I was there, though we hadn't spoken yet. You must be Nadine, he said, his voice calm but direct. I've heard a bit about you. You're the one who wants to blow up a timber empire, huh? I slid the file onto the table. It was thick with evidence, everything we had painstakingly gathered. My hands shook slightly as I laid it down between us. Elian's eyebrows raised as he flipped through the first few pages, his sharp eyes scanning every detail. This is some heavy stuff, he murmured, tapping the folder. You sure you want to go public with this? I nodded, my chest tightening. I have no choice. My family already tried to erase me. I can't let them get away with it. He didn't look at me at first. He just kept flipping through the papers, scanning the documents with a critical eye. A few minutes passed before he leaned back in his chair, finally looking me in the eye. You're not after revenge, he said, his tone thoughtful. You want your name back. I blinked, surprised. What do you mean? He smiled slightly. This isn't about the money, is it? You want the truth out there. You want people to know who you really are. This isn't just a family fight. This is about reclaiming your identity. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. That's exactly it. That's what I had been fighting for all this time. Not the timber empire, not the fortune, just my name, my place in the world. You're right, I said quietly. I'm done being erased. I want people to know the truth. Elian leaned forward, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. All right then, I'll do it. But this is going to be big. I'll make sure it hits the right outlets. Investigative pieces, news cycles. This isn't just a local scandal. It's going to shake the foundations of everything your family has built. His words made me pause. The weight of it hit me. This wasn't just a fight for my inheritance. This was a fight for my life, for who I was, and it was going to put me in the public eye in a way I'd never imagined. It wasn't just about the truth anymore. It was about the whole world knowing what my father had tried to bury. I could feel the fear creeping in, the doubt, but I swallowed it down. This was bigger than me now. I'm ready, I said. Let's do it. Elian nodded and pulled out his phone. He typed a quick message, then put it down on the table. This story's going to break wide open, Nadine. I'm going to send it out tonight. I took a deep breath. And then? He grinned. Then we watched the fallout. Trust me, it's going to get messy, but you'll get what you want, the truth. I sat back in my chair, my hands still trembling slightly. For the first time, I wasn't alone in this fight. I had a plan, a way to expose everything. We're not stopping until this is out there, I said, my voice steady now. I'm not going to let them erase me again. Elian's smile widened, and he reached for his coffee, taking a long sip before standing up. This is just the beginning, Nadine. Let's light a fire under this. And with that, I knew I was no longer just the daughter of Dominic Voss. I was Nadine Voss, the woman who would make sure the truth outlived the lie. The story broke late that night, and the world didn't take long to react. By morning, the headline was everywhere. Dead on paper, timber heiress, declared deceased in $63 million cover-up. The world went into a frenzy. Every news outlet, every local broadcast, and even national media picked it up. Elian's work had ignited a firestorm, and I was at the center of it all. At first, it was surreal. I spent the morning flipping through news articles, watching the video interviews with journalists, and reading the commentary that flooded my social media. People were shocked. Veteran groups rallied behind me, some offering public statements of support. Others were more critical, questioning how something like this could happen. How could someone be erased from existence legally, without anyone noticing? But there was a dark side to the reaction, too. People were intrigued, fascinated even. They wanted to know who I was. They wanted to know about the timber empire, about the family behind it, and what had happened to me. They saw me as a figurehead, a symbol of something greater, a story, not a person. I knew it would come with a price, but I hadn't been prepared for the way it would feel. My life, everything I thought I knew, was suddenly a spectacle. It didn't take long for my father to respond. The next evening, Dominic Voss made his appearance on a live broadcast. The cameras cut to him, sitting in a sleek leather chair, dressed in his usual business attire, looking calm and composed. He wasn't rattled. He never was. But the words that came from his mouth were designed to dismantle everything I had fought for. I'm here tonight to set the record straight, he began, his voice deep, authoritative. This is a family matter, one that should have been handled behind closed doors. My daughter, Nadine, has chosen to air our dirty laundry for the public to see. It's unfortunate. She's always been a troubled child, looking for validation from anyone who would give it to her. The words hit me like a punch in the stomach. Troubled? A child? He made it sound like I was the one in the wrong. The way he spoke about me, as if I was some kind of emotional disaster, confirmed everything I'd always feared. That to him, I was never more than an inconvenience. My daughter has been estranged from the family for years, Dominic continued, his eyes narrowing slightly as if rehearsing the line he knew would hurt the most. And now, after all this time, she's decided to come back and try to tear down everything we've built. It's not just painful, it's tragic. I'm here to say for the record that this is a lie. She is not the rightful heir of Voss Timber. I could feel the blood draining from my face as the words hit home. I hadn't expected him to roll over and admit the truth, but hearing him outright deny me, outright lie about me in front of the world, stung more than I thought possible. But the most infuriating part of it all was the way he painted me as unstable, a troubled child, the emotionally unwell daughter who was causing this chaos. I knew what he was doing. He was attacking my credibility. He was trying to turn the tables to make me seem like the villain. If he could paint me as unhinged, then maybe the truth of what he'd done wouldn't hold weight. Maybe the media would see me as just another disgruntled child making baseless accusations. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I focused on what needed to be done next, Legal action, strategy. I was no longer just responding emotionally. This was war, and I had no intention of fighting it with noise and chaos. The next day, Elian sent me a text. It was short, but it carried the weight of everything we'd been working toward. Don't engage publicly. Keep quiet. I've got something bigger coming. I followed his advice. As hard as it was, I stayed silent. I didn't give my father or anyone else a chance to bait me into responding. Instead, I focused on the bigger picture. I spent the next few days working with my legal team, pulling together all the documentation we had gathered, building a case so airtight no lie could survive it. Every document Harlow had analyzed, every piece of evidence Elian had uncovered, it was all part of a plan. And I wasn't going to stop until I had what was rightfully mine. And then Elian called. "It's time," he said. His voice was steady, but I could hear the urgency beneath it. "I've got a video, a smoking gun, and I'm about to release it." I sat up straight, feeling the tension rise. "What kind of video?" "The kind that will ruin your father's narrative once and for all," Elian replied. "It's the final nail in the coffin. The video your grandfather recorded weeks before his death." My heart skipped a beat. "Grandfather recorded something? What does it say?" Elian paused. "It's his message to you, Nadine. His final wish. And it confirms everything you've been fighting for." I could hear the sound of typing on Elian's end. Then a soft click. The video file appeared in my inbox. I didn't waste any time. I hit play. The video started with my grandfather, looking older but sharp as ever. He was seated in what looked like a small study, the walls behind him lined with books. His eyes, though tired, were focused. His voice came through the screen with strength. "Nadine," he began, his tone calm but heavy with intention. "If you're watching this, then I'm already gone. And it means that your father has followed through with his plan to erase you from everything. He's been erasing you for years, and it's time for the truth to come to light." My grandfather spoke of the family's history, about how power had corrupted those at the top, about how Dominic had used every tool at his disposal to keep control, including manipulating the system, forging documents, and pushing people out of the way who didn't fit into his vision of the empire. But it was what he said next that took my breath away. "Nadine," my grandfather's voice wavered slightly, but it was steady. "You are the rightful heir to Voss Timber, not Dominic, not Mallory. They've stolen from you, manipulated you, and erased you. But I'm giving you what I couldn't. Take what's yours, Nadine. The truth is on your side. Don't let them win." I felt tears well in my eyes. The weight of his words, his confirmation of everything I had known deep down, hit me harder than I had anticipated. And just like that, the tide shifted. The video, raw and filled with the truth of my grandfather's final wish, would be the spark. I wasn't just fighting to get back what was mine. I was fighting for something bigger now. Justice, truth. The media would eat it up. It was the one thing my father couldn't control. Proof. Proof that they had manipulated the system. Proof that they had erased me. And now the world would see it. "Elian, release it," I said, my voice steady. "It's time for the world to know the truth." With that, the video went live. The message from my grandfather, the one they'd tried to bury for good, was out in the world, and the game had changed. The days after the video went viral were nothing short of chaotic. The backlash was immediate and overwhelming. News outlets around the world were running with the story. The footage of my grandfather, speaking with such clarity and certainty about the lies my father had woven, became the centerpiece of every broadcast. The media couldn't get enough of it. It was hard to keep up with all the messages, calls, and notifications flooding in, but I couldn't afford to be distracted. This wasn't just a media spectacle anymore. This was the fight of my life, and it was time to take it to the next level. I had spent too many years being silent, too many years letting my family decide my fate for me. Now, it was my turn to write the ending. But it wasn't just the media that was making noise. Behind closed doors, my legal team was preparing the case that would change everything. The court date had been set, and everything was lining up perfectly. The truth, the real truth, was coming for them. It was no longer a question of if I'd win, it was a matter of how badly they'd lose. I was sitting in my office late one evening, reviewing some legal documents, when my phone buzzed with a call from my attorney, Judith. "Are you sitting down?" she asked, her voice low, almost conspiratorial. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of her words already. "Why? What's going on?" "They've folded," she said, the words hanging in the air like a guillotine's blade. "Your father's team, they've surrendered." I didn't know what to say. My heart skipped a beat. What do you mean they've surrendered? I asked, my voice rising in disbelief. We're not even in court yet. Not officially, no, Judith said, but they've agreed to settle out of court. They're willing to accept your terms, all of them. Voss timber, your inheritance, all of it. They'll transfer control to you. I sat there in stunned silence. I'd been preparing for a long, grueling battle. I had imagined a drawn-out war in the courts, a battle that would leave scars. But this was not what I expected. Is it really over? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Judith let out a long breath, the kind of exhale you make when you've carried something heavy for a long time. It's over, Nadine. They know they can't win. Not with the evidence we have. Not with the public outcry. And that video of your grandfather? That was the nail in the coffin. Your father can't spin this anymore. He can't make you the villain. He's lost. The relief that flooded through me was immediate, but it didn't last long. I couldn't forget how much had been taken from me, how many years of my life had been stolen by this family's cruelty and control. Is he going to admit it? I asked. Will he apologize? Will he own up to any of this? Judith paused. Nadine, this isn't about apologies anymore. It's about power, and he's already given up his claim to it. Don't expect anything from him, and don't waste your energy trying to get an apology. He doesn't know how to give one. I felt the anger stir in me again. I'd been hoping for some moment of reckoning, some final confrontation, a moment where my father would have to look me in the eye and admit what he'd done. But Judith was right. That moment wasn't coming. My father would never admit his wrongs. He'd never apologize. He'd just move on like he always did. And I had to be okay with that. So, what's next? I asked. Next? Judith's voice was firm. You get what's rightfully yours. You take control of Voss Timber. You make your mark. You do it all on your own terms. I let those words sink in for a moment. This was real. It wasn't a dream. I was free. I thanked Judith, disconnected the call, and sat in the quiet of my office for a long moment, reflecting on everything that had led me here. The clock on the wall ticked away the seconds. It was late, but I felt wide awake. Everything was about to change. But just as I started to relax, my phone buzzed again. It was a text from Harlow. Court date is still set for tomorrow. They're pushing for a final statement. Be ready. I stood up, pacing across the room. It wasn't over yet. This was the final step. The official legal victory. The culmination of everything I had worked for. I was done being erased. This was my moment to claim everything I deserved. The next day, I sat in the courtroom with my legal team, ready to present the evidence that would dismantle the last remnants of my father's control. I had come this far, and there was no turning back. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. My father's team was already seated across from us, their lawyers huddled, trying to work out a final deal, but I could see the tension in the air. They knew they had lost. They were scrambling to salvage what little they could. And then, the judge called the case. It was time. The proceedings started with formalities, but the weight of everything that had happened, everything that was about to change, hung heavy in the air. I was ready. I was prepared. And I had the truth on my side. My lawyer stood up, presenting the evidence one by one, the forged signatures, the tampered documents, the lies that had been hidden for years. With each piece of evidence, the case against my father grew stronger. Finally, the judge turned to Dominic. Mr. Voss, do you have anything to add? Dominic stood, his face pale but still as stoic as ever. He glanced at me briefly, his eyes cold, but I could see the subtle shake in his hands. No, Your Honor, he said, his voice lacking the usual confidence. We'll accept the settlement. That was it. The battle was over. The judge nodded. Then the case is closed. Miss Voss, you are the rightful heir to Voss Timber. I felt it then. The weight of the years of struggle, of pain, of everything I had fought for finally lifting off my shoulders. It was official. The empire was mine, my family's empire, and I would rebuild it, not as the daughter of Dominic Voss, but as Nadine Voss, the woman who refused to be erased. When the judge banged the gavel, I stood up, my heart racing. My father didn't look at me. He didn't react. Mallory didn't either. But I was done. This was my victory, and I would make sure the world knew it. The courtroom cleared, but I stayed seated for a moment, savoring the moment of finality. This was mine now. The weeks following the court victory were a blur. The media had moved on to the next big story, and Voss Timber was officially in my hands. The world knew the truth about my family, about the deceit, the manipulation, but I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. It was more like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders, leaving me with an eerie emptiness. I took control of the company, but the transition wasn't easy. My father's old executives didn't know what to make of me. They had expected someone like him, someone cold, calculating, with no room for emotion. But I wasn't like that. I had my own way of running things, and I made sure the changes I brought were felt from the ground up. But with all the business and corporate meetings, the long hours and late nights, there was something in the back of my mind that kept pulling me back to the past. It was a late afternoon when I saw Mallory for the first time since the verdict. I had been walking out of the office building after another exhausting day, my mind already occupied with the next thing I needed to do, when I spotted her across the street. She was standing with her husband, talking in low voices, looking almost like they were trying to hide something. They didn't see me at first, and I could have just walked by, but something stopped me. I walked over slowly, my feet sounding loud against the pavement. Mallory looked up and froze when she saw me, her eyes widening in shock. Her husband, however, had already noticed me and turned to face me, giving me a tight, forced smile. "Well, well," Mallory finally said, her voice barely a whisper, as though we were strangers. "Look who's back in charge." Her words were tinged with bitterness, but there was something else in her eyes. Something softer. Regret? Guilt? Maybe, but she wasn't about to show it. Not yet. I stared at her for a long moment, unsure of what to say. Part of me wanted to lash out, to demand answers for all the years of manipulation, the years they had spent trying to bury me. But something told me it wasn't worth it. Not anymore. "I heard you've been doing quite well," she said, trying to sound casual, but I could see the tightness in her jaw, the stiffness in her posture. I raised an eyebrow. "Doing well?" I repeated. "You mean I finally got what was mine?" She didn't respond at first, and I could tell she was struggling with something. "I just wanted to say—" She trailed off, her voice faltering for a moment. "I'm sorry. For how things went down, I never meant for it to get this far." I wasn't sure if I heard that right. Mallory? Apologizing? It didn't feel real. But her eyes met mine, and there was something sincere in them. "You were always the outsider," she continued, her voice quieter now. "I don't know if I ever really saw you as part of the family. It was easier to push you away." I couldn't stop myself from laughing softly, though there was no humor in it. "You never saw me as family, Mallory. You saw me as a threat, as someone who might one day take what was yours." She looked at me, finally dropping the facade. "I was scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to lose everything I had. And I thought if I kept you out of the picture, it would be easier." I wasn't sure what to say to that. It felt too late for apologies. The damage had been done, and I had already moved on. I wasn't the same person I had been when I first left for the fire seasons. I wasn't the same person who had come back, hoping for a family that would accept her. I had built my own life, one that didn't rely on the approval of people who never cared. "You never had to lose anything," I said finally, my voice calm. "But you did. And now, well, I guess we both get what we deserve." Mallory's lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm still your sister," she said softly, but it sounded hollow. I didn't respond right away. I took a deep breath, watching her for a moment longer. Then, without another word, I turned and walked away. I didn't need her apology. I didn't need anything from her. I'd already walked away from that family years ago. The next day, I saw my father sitting on a bench outside a small cafe, staring out into the street. He looked smaller than I remembered, older, diminished. I hadn't expected to see him, not like this. But there he was, sitting in the sun, with nothing but his thoughts and the past weighing him down. I hesitated for a moment, standing across the street watching him. There was a part of me that wanted to march over, demand answers, tell him how badly he'd hurt me. But another part of me, the part I had become, knew that none of it would change anything. I didn't need him to validate me. I didn't need his apology either. He had already made his choices, and so had I. I crossed the street, but I didn't stop to talk to him. I walked past him, letting the distance between us grow wider with each step. He didn't call out to me. He didn't even move, and I kept walking. The silence between us a final goodbye. For the first time in my life, I felt free. Later that day, I sat down in front of my computer looking at the files I had started to build for the new venture I was planning. It wasn't going to be about Voss Timber. I didn't need to take control of the empire that had tried to erase me. I would create something new. I opened the first document of my new project, a center for displaced women firefighters, for those who faced discrimination, trauma, or abandonment after their service. I smiled as I typed, knowing this was where I was meant to be. Above the door of the center, I would hang a plaque, for those they tried to silence. And for the first time in years, I felt at peace. I wasn't running from anyone anymore. Not my father, not my past. This was mine. The center opened quietly, without the fanfare or the media frenzy that had surrounded my fight for Voss Timber. It wasn't about the spectacle anymore. It was about something real, something lasting, something I could build with my own hands, my own vision. I didn't want the corporate world that had tried to swallow me whole. I didn't want the timber empire, the legacy of a family that never really saw me. Instead, I wanted to create a space where women like me, strong, capable, yet so often overlooked, could be seen, heard, and supported. A place where they could heal, rebuild, and reclaim what had been taken from them. I had worked long hours to get it off the ground. The funding had come from a mix of my own savings and grants for women's initiatives. The first few weeks were slow, but as the word spread, the center began to take on a life of its own. The first woman who walked through the doors was Sierra. She was in her mid-20s with dark hair pulled back into a tight ponytail and eyes that held stories of pain and perseverance. She was quiet at first, hesitant. I could see it in the way she shifted her weight from foot to foot, the way she avoided eye contact. I'd heard her story from one of the outreach workers, but hearing it from her was different. She had been dishonorably discharged after reporting misconduct on her team during a wildfire season. She was one of the few women on her crew, and when she spoke out, she was silenced. It wasn't just her career that was destroyed, it was her sense of purpose, her place in the world. The military had turned its back on her. Her comrades had too. I could see the anger in her eyes when she told me her story, but there was something else too, a sense of loss. She wasn't just angry at the system, she was angry at herself for letting it break her. "I don't know where to go from here," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "I've tried finding work, but no one will hire me. It's like I'm invisible." I leaned forward, listening carefully, feeling her pain in a way I couldn't explain. I knew what it felt like to be erased, to have your worth questioned because of the actions of others. "You're not invisible," I said, my voice steady but gentle. "And you're not alone." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Hope. "I don't know if I can ever go back to that world," she admitted, looking down at her hands. "I don't know if I'll ever trust again." I nodded. "You don't have to go back to that world. You're here now. You're starting over." Over the next few weeks, Sierra became one of the center's first success stories. We connected her with a job placement program, helped her find therapy and counseling, and gave her the space to rebuild her confidence. By the time she left, she had a new job lined up with a private firefighting company that valued her experience and expertise. More importantly, she had her dignity back. Sierra's success didn't just mark a win for her, it was a win for the center, a sign that we were doing something right. Soon after, more women started to walk through the door. Some were veterans like Sierra, others had been injured on the job, some had faced discrimination, others had been pushed out of the field entirely. They all came for different reasons, but they had one thing in common. They needed a place to heal. We worked hard to create a community, a safe space where the women could support each other, share their stories, and rebuild their lives. The center wasn't just a place for therapy and job placement, it was a family that didn't judge you for your past, but helped you fight for your future. One afternoon, as I was going over paperwork in the back office, I heard a knock on the door. I looked up to see Sierra standing in the doorway, her face bright with excitement. "I did it," she said, almost out of breath. "I got the job. I start next week." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, but I kept my composure. I stood up and gave her a hug. "I'm so proud of you," I whispered, and I meant it. Sierra smiled, the weight of the last few months lifting from her shoulders. "Thank you. You gave me the chance to believe in myself again." She left that day, but her words stayed with me. This was why I had built the center. This was the legacy I wanted to leave behind. Not an empire of timber, but a place where women could stand tall and reclaim what had been taken from them. I knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would be more struggles, more setbacks, more women who needed help, more battles to fight. But I also knew that I was no longer alone in this fight. As I sat in the quiet of the center that evening, the sun setting outside, I looked around at the space we had created. The walls that had once felt empty were now filled with hope, with possibility, with women who had found their way back. Above the door, there was a plaque. Simple, but powerful. For those they tried to silence. It was a reminder of everything we had overcome, and everything we had yet to build. This was where my real legacy began, and it was only just the beginning.